because nobody used them anymore. And I didn't want to give them away so quickly, because in Louisiana, when you're trying to teach electrostatics, most days are too humid to do any electrostatics. So it's very difficult to get a Van de Graaff generator to work very well, or to get, wool and rubber balloons to accumulate charge of any substance. But what I learned by accident was that if I had a overhead projector running in the room, at the front of the room, I could do my electrostatics experiments near that overhead projector, and it dried out the room enough, for that part of the room, enough so I could actually see electrostatics in a way that was not evident in other parts of a swamp-filled Louisiana classroom. Well, it wasn't filled with swamp, but it was very humid in there. So that's beside the various kinds of optics things that you could do with an overhead projector. So in my mind, I want to write a manuscript with this title, 5 Things You Can Do with Your Physics Classroom with an Overhead Projector. And I've still got to figure out the other 2 or 3 besides sort of optics and electrostatics, but it feels like there's something there for sure. So to have us move into breakout groups of maybe 3, maybe 4, if it's not an evenly divided by 3 number, and sort of discuss with each other what our sort of favorite manuscript or title would be, if you had plenty of time and energy to spend on a manuscript that you were thinking of. So, Christine, can you put us in breakout rooms, and well, maybe just be about 5 or 10 minutes, just each person in the room share your favorite idea for a manuscript, if assuming you have one, and if you don't, then maybe generate something.
Sure. We'll just do it as a whole group, or shall we?
Well, I was thinking that we'd have 8 little breakout groups, and we would spend a little time talking through these things with each other in the small groups.
Fantastic. I will set up 6 breakout rooms. I think we have fewer than 20, so.
Very good.
And let's see. All right, breakout rooms are happening. And Gary and Joe, if you want to join a breakout room, feel free to do so. I wasn't going to make you all go in.
All right, thank you.
And I will pause the recording.
Thank you. So as you're coming back, if you have a potential manuscript in your head and a title, just type the title into the chat so we can sort of have a list of them. We've already got several in there, and so it'd be good to have the whole list there if you're willing to do that. The next thing I wanted to talk about, we have everybody back? Looks like we do. I think so.
Everyone's back.
Is to discuss audience. Who are you trying to reach? Which journals do they read? One thing I'd say about audience is that you should read the editorial policy, because often that gives you a good clue about the audience. There's a question that, can we reshare the slides? You mean I'm going to make these available to Christine, if she can then provide it for everyone at some point. We can have it. We have a recording of it too, so that'll be useful, I think. Does the recording get stored somewhere available in communities? It does. Okay.
When we went to the breakout groups, the slides went away from the screen.
You mean the slides that I'm presenting right now?
Yes.
Right, but they'll be on the recording. I didn't do anything while you were gone.
Well, no, the recording will record whatever screen is being presented.
Right. Okay.
And so you need to share your screen.
Oh, So I'm not sharing right now, you're saying?
Correct.
That's what I hadn't understood. Okay, sorry. Yeah, so here we are. I haven't really advanced it very far, but I was talking about audience. Another good way to get a sense of your audience is to browse through the journal which you want to submit. Of course, that seems fairly obvious, but it's a wonder how many papers get submitted where it's clear the person doesn't know the journal and the author who does it has never seen what kind of articles are in the journal, but they get submitted anyway. So I'll need to say that. So another aspect of getting ready to submit a manuscript or to write a manuscript is to look at the background and what's been done before, what's already been published. How does your work in particular fit into the literature that's been published? What other work relates to yours? What would a reader want to know who's reading about your project? So I think what I'd like us to do now is to take a few minutes and explore what kind of manuscripts you can find that are connected to your proposed manuscript title. So most of you, it seemed like, had a good, had a reasonable project or manuscript that you were thinking about writing. And I'd like you to take a few minutes to see what background research you can do, what kind of manuscripts you can find, articles that are already written about something that you would like to do. So the proposal is that we spend maybe 15 minutes doing web searches and such to just see if you can find anything in the physics teacher, and I have a link there that you can copy and do a search in physics teacher to see if it matches your your manuscript that you wanted to publish, and see what has been already done. Or if you can't find anything, then that would be already a step, a useful step too. You don't have to restrict yourself to physics teacher. If you have access to other journals or other information, of course, the web has all kinds of stuff. Then by all means go there also. But I think starting at the physics teacher is useful for our purposes. If you're having trouble getting started, I'm taking these 10 or 15 minutes to sort of look in the background. Then use my examples that I gave and look and see what you can find in the background of those. So is there anything about things you can do with an overhead projector in the literature already, in physics teacher or otherwise? Or is there something about using spandex in the classroom already in the literature that you can find in journals? So I had in mind that we do this in breakout groups, but it feels like we could do this more as just a project that we all participate in, and we can interject things as we go. Christine, does that seem reasonable to you, or do you feel like we ought to break out groups to do this?
Why don't we go into breakout rooms and share what they're finding? Does that sound all right?
When we come back, we can maybe do a little bit of summary of something like that.
Great.
From each group. So yeah, so maybe each group they designate a speaker who might speak for your group and sort of say what y'all found on your little background research endeavor.
And I'll create 5 breakout rooms this time, so there's a slightly larger group.
All right, thanks.
Great. So
and if you don't have your own manuscript in mind, then you can feel free to use one of the ones that are the ones that I've suggested there too.
So we'll give you 10 minutes.
Excellent.
All right. One thing before I open up the breakout rooms, is there a search function just for TPT, or do we need to go through the AIP search?
When you go through AIP, when you go to TPT website, within the AIP mechanism,
okay.
then you just search the window at the top. That is strictly for TPT purposes. You can also choose TPT and AJP together. So you get both of those for at one shot if you want, but you have to pick that option from the menu.
Great. Okay, so I'm opening up the breakout rooms then.
Thanks. Okay, so we're all coming back.
There was a question in the chat about, or from William Braun, about whether this is standard in all publications. And I think it's referring to Joe's comment about how TPT
Yes.
cannot publish something that's already been published. Is that what you were talking about, William?
Yes.
Right. We don't publish anything that's published elsewhere in peer-reviewed journals. Now, that doesn't mean that if it's online somewhere that it can't be published. Because if it's an online, like in the archive, for example, that's not peer-reviewed in the same way that Physics Teacher is. And so if it was published in a peer-reviewed journal, then it should not be replicated in Physics Teacher. But if it's a web source that is reliable but still not peer-reviewed, we would still be happy to take it as a possible publication. So make that distinction. And with the web being so much more prevalent now than anything was in the past, it seems like maybe an unimportant distinction, but it is the distinction we make. So several things you might find on the web in fully looking good final published form are still eligible for Physics Teacher if they've never been in a peer review journal before. But of course, they would be then subject to the modifications that the reviewers insist upon. Okay, so let's report out a little bit on the background research. Can anybody tell us something that you found online or in the Physics Teacher or elsewhere that would be relevant for your proposed manuscript?
Yeah, so let me share. My name is Bilas Pal. I'm currently doing research on how simulation helps students to understand difficult physics concepts. So yeah, I see some similar kind of thing, not exactly what I'm doing. That's a good thing. So yeah, it looks like I can write a paper and submit. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Anyone else that had a story to tell about finding something that you didn't really know was out there that was useful for you?
Yes, I can share. So I was actually looking at two different things. One was sort of this program I've done with sort of rockets for their designing and building payloads that actually go on NASA suborbital rockets from Wallops with a bunch of other universities. And so it's a relatively low cost way of launching into space, still $20,000 or something, but that's relatively low cost, right? But it was really impactful doing it at mostly at two-year university. So I've wanted to kind of publish that somewhere for a while. And I didn't find really anything like it in the Physics Teacher. And so that's making me wonder, is it just that nobody's really written about it, or is that something that's maybe a little bit outside of the scope of this? And then the other thing I was thinking about was that I also worked with some students to build a pretty cheap scale model of the solar system that was walkable throughout the campus, right? And I've been thinking if that's worthy of a publication or more just like a poster at a conference or something. And it seems like there are some things like that already in the Physics Teacher, but they're also a little bit older. So maybe we'll find some like new take on it or something that it might be appropriate.
Great. Maybe we have time for one more. Anybody else want to tell us a story about something you found on your little background research search? Anybody find anything about spandex or overhead projectors?
I did find that one site was, I think it was NSGA, recommending that students not even use liquid nitrogen. So it's like, well, that kind of negates, if that's true, my whole lab. that I want them to be able to do.
Oh, well, you can write the paper that refutes them.
Well, I mean, if they can handle it safe, I've already done the demonstrations. They understand, hopefully, the safety things that are going to be involved, because of it now, and then they should be able to, take a small styrofoam cup back to their lab station and use microliters into a inverted graduated cylinder to get the gas. And so, I don't know. If they screw around, then anything can be dangerous.
Right. All right. Well, thanks everyone. That was kind of interesting to see how, I don't know, robust this thing can be. We were all going in different directions. Finally, just about generic manuscripts and places to submit them. Most articles need to have a storyline that's sort of discernible, and the storylines can be wildly different. You can sort of say, you take the student perspective, you can take the instructor's perspective, or you can sort of tell a sort of fiction story about how it might go in your classroom. And I guess I had in mind that we would talk about a few examples of types of articles that you might have seen before. So, but maybe rather than us sort of going away to do this, let's just talk through some examples of articles that you saw after you looked through some of the background research, or maybe from your own experience. Can anybody say, just off the top of their head, kinds of articles you might have seen before in Physics Teacher or other places that seemed useful for you as a practicing teacher? What's a typical kind of article that you might have found useful in the past for your teaching?
I guess I've always liked the, here's a, practical lab kind of a thing, that you can apply. And then at the end of the article, here's some applications of, what students are getting out of it. So, those
And
are
you have in
nice.
mind to do that with your liquid nitrogen article then?
Yeah.
Right. Good. So anybody else have some sort of style of an article that spoke to them as a practicing teacher?
Gary, could you just go back a slide so that people can see the storyline? That would be great. Thank you.
Right. Yeah. So this is the one we're kind of focusing on. What kind of examples have you seen?
Well, I can share an article. I don't remember if it was the physics teacher, but it was a few years ago. Somebody wrote an article about how they sort of accidentally stumbled upon a way of teaching that was really successful to them. And that's what I feel that where I kind of fit in. I feel like I have accidentally stumbled across something. And that to me is just, it's sort of organic that it can happen. And that article keeps coming back to my mind when I'm thinking about my own teaching. Yeah. And sometimes you just accidentally stumble across something.
Yeah, I have to say that one article that had the most impact on me was the title alone was enough to sort of reframe my thinking. The title was "Letters Home Instead of Lab Reports," and I just was so struck by the idea that why am I having my students write lab reports when they should be writing something that I feel like they should be writing something that's sort of more authentic, writing a letter to their physics teacher from high school if they're in college now, or writing to their parents, or writing to their aunt or something like that about something sciencey is sort of a much more authentic thing to do. And so I just keep that close at hand. When I teach advanced lab, I always have my students write at least one letter to their high school physics teacher about what they're doing in lab. And all of the writing exercises are I try to make them as more authentic than what I used to do, which was sort of a standard lab report template that I never liked reading, but I love reading these letters home. and the article was the physics teacher article, but the title is the only thing I can remember about it, but it's enough. Let's see, we have one more example. Anybody have a type of article that caught their attention that speaks to them as a practicing teacher?
Yeah, so I can share one thing. So I'm very new in teaching. So in my first semester, I actually struggle to teach. Many students actually find that physics is difficult. I mean, that time I was actually traditionally teach. I mean, that's how I learned. But then I was looking how differently teach physics so that student gets most of the thing. So I was actually looking different or innovative teaching idea in introductory physics classes. So yeah.
Nice. Mhm. Excellent. Thank you. Okay. Well, if you come up with other examples, maybe you can type it in the chat or just interrupt with it or come in the quick question and answer session part. I'm going to go forward now and finally get to the venue question and then focus on the physics teacher a little bit more specifically and what kinds of sort of framework and guidelines that are available in the physics teacher as you think about your manuscript. So first talk about the venue. Does the venue, meaning the journal that you're going to submit to, does it reach your intended audience? Are there length restrictions to the manuscript? What topical and content guidelines are there given about the journal? Are there fees? Do you have to pay to publish? What is the time scale for the accepted articles from submission to publication? And are there other considerations that you might have about the venue? Some possible venues that come to mind for me, besides the physics teacher, are also the American Journal of Physics, which is another publication of AAPT. Physics Education is a publication of IOP, the Institute of Physics in the United Kingdom. There's all sorts of NSTA publications that I'm not familiar with, but I know that some of you have been familiar with them because you mentioned one of them earlier. The European Journal of Physics is sort of a parallel to the American Journal of Physics, and it covers sort of upper level stuff in addition to intro level stuff. Physics Educator is a sort of a brand new online journal that I've seen recently. And then the Physical Review Physics Education Research is a much more research journal, but it's all about a lot about the introductory physics classroom and the research associated with that. That have caught your eye or that you may know about. But with regard to physics teacher, I've answered these questions in orange here. Does physics teacher reach your intended audience? Well, the physics teacher is very explicit about being for introductory physics, practicing physics teachers. What length restrictions are there? The benchmark length of a TPT article is 2,000 words, and it's been that way for years, and I have not aspired to change that at all. So that's about 3 or 4 pages of physics teacher content, depending on how many figures there are. And you can get up to 4,000 words if you have permission, so it's granted ahead of time for certain articles. In general, we look for articles to be about 2,000 words. What kinds of topical content guidelines are they? It's really very wide open as long as it's interesting to intro physics teachers in the editor's opinion. So that covers a lot of territory, but it does sort of rule out something that's clearly meant for upper level physics students at the university level or graduate students. Are there fees associated with publication in the physics teacher? There are not in general. However, if you want your article to be open access so that anyone that comes to it on the internet can read it, then you have to pay for that open access, and that costs $3,000 per article. But if you are just publishing in the physics teacher for readership of AAPT, who have access to the article by virtue of their membership in AAPT, then there's no fees for that at all. And in general, this open access question is sort of disrupting, physics publications in general. I guess I'll just add that most of the physics teachers' authors are not funded by NSF or any other government entity. Most of us who write for a physics teacher are sort of doing it on top of our usual day job. It's not part of our research that we are getting compensated for, or that the government has paid for. And so in some sense, the argument that all of it should be open access to everyone, it's not quite the same argument for writers who are not funded by National Science Foundation or other government agencies. So you don't have to feel bad that it's, I was just trying to say, I don't think you need to feel bad. It's not available access to everyone immediately. Of course, you can send your article to anyone you want individually, who's using it for teaching purposes and things like that. And there's no restriction on that either. So, it's the phrase open access has got a lot of baggage that goes with it, and some of it's important considerations, especially for research that's already been funded by the government. But in general speaking, most teaching research is not that way. What is the time scale for accepted articles from submission to publication? For TPT, it's about 1 year currently. We have been faster than that in the past, but we had fewer submissions in the past. We're at an all-time high in submissions in physics teacher these days, roughly 1.5 submissions per day or something like that. And we used to have less than 1 per day. So it is made a somewhat of a delay. And you might have noticed that physics teacher is a little bit thicker than it used to be. And that's our attempt to try to catch up or keep up with the submissions that are and the acceptances that are increasing lately. So that's the answer to those kinds of questions about TPT in particular. And you might be very interested in those kind of answers for other journals that you are thinking about submitting to. And you can, seek their websites insight about that. What kinds of things are publishable at TBT? Well, the guidelines are very specific, and I've already mentioned this once or twice. The papers we publish are aimed at teachers of the introductory physics course at high schools, 2-year colleges, or 4-year colleges and universities. In particular, technical correctness is not the only factor used in determining eligibility. The principal criterion for acceptance is whether, in the opinion of the editors, the paper is sufficiently useful and interesting to practicing teachers at introductory level physics. So that's that criteria is the sort of the benchmark that we go by. You might want to know a little bit more descriptive what's going on, and you can find this on a further details about physics teacher, describing some of the articles that you might like to see. Innovative physics demonstrations, new ways of doing lab experiments, ideas for presenting difficult concepts more clearly, suggestions for implementing newer technology into teaching, giving historical insights that enrich the physics course, and we do have a good representation of historical type courses, articles, and implementing ideas for physics education research in the physics classroom. So certainly it's not bereft of research, but an article that's purely research really doesn't belong in the physics teacher. It really should be some synthesis of research in the practicing physics classroom if it's going to have a lot of research aspect to it. Here's some examples recently that are some of the most popular that online. If you look at the numbers of people who download them. This paper recently by Susan Marie Franchak on Marie Curie and how she was devoted as a teacher and her experiences as a teacher is a really remarkable article that a lot of people have enjoyed. This September, we had a special collection of physics articles on climate change in the classroom. And this one is particularly popular, an energy unit fueled by climate change. Alyssa Levy and Abigail Dane and Leslie Chamberlain. I believe they're going to speak at the New Orleans meeting about their paper and how you can sort of implemented in a module form into a regular physics classroom, high school and two-year college. I think are both represented here. Rolling and sliding down an inclined plane is a paper by Rod Cross, who often writes on a subject matter like this, sort of clarifying exactly what is rolling friction and how it relates to rolling down an inclined plane. But you don't have to start off with a full-fledged manuscript. At Physics Teacher, we have things that we call columns, column articles that are about half the size of a regular article, almost always less than 2 pages when they're published. And they come in lots of different flavors. We have something called Little Gems. We have iPhysics Labs, Talking Physics, Astronotes, Websites, Visual Physics, Just Physics, and also Figuring Physics cartoons, and the Survey Says, which is about physics data in particular. And all of these short articles are a little different than our usual regular articles. Regular articles are peer-reviewed by experts in the field of whatever the article has to do with, whereas the column articles are shorter manuscripts that are still reviewed by editors who are experts in the field, but not sent out for peer review necessarily. Here's something called the Little Gems, and Chris Chiaverini used to be the editor for this column. These are shorter pieces, typically that use everyday household items in their demonstrations and experiments. Now Jennifer Burial at Morehead State University in Montana, in Kentucky, sorry, is the editor for this column. And it's always got sort of catchy little demonstrations that you might want to use in your classroom. iPhysics Labs is sort of about using an iPhone in the classroom, and there's just dozens and dozens of papers that now cover this territory. But if it's a short article, then it still can go into iPhysics Labs. And Joachim Kuhn and Patrick Voigt are the column editors there. Typically, you contact the column editors directly by email to suggest something, and then they let you know whether they think it is a productive suggestion or not. And then you would go ahead and submit it through the PXP software after you've had sort of a nod from the editors. Talking Physics is shorter pieces focusing on the high school physics classroom. James Lincoln is the editor of that. He teaches in California, and that's the most recent one, I think, is the Doom of the Unicorns, which is kind of a clever piece about electrostatics on the Earth's surface. And that's where it focused on high school things. Here, Astronauts is focused on astronomy, as you might imagine. And here's the recent article there by Ann Tabor Morris, but the column editors are Don Smith and Janelle Bailey. Websites is McIsaac has been doing that one for a while, and it's just sort of short blurbs on the web about new things that you might not have noticed before. Announcements and reviews of selected sites of interest to physics teachers. Just contact Dan directly if you have an item for that. And most of those items are less than 200 words. It's just a sort of a couple of sentence blurb and then a link to something interesting that you found on the internet that's about physics teaching or has relevance for physics teaching. Visual Physics is a sporadic column that we have. If you have a picture that you think tells a physics story, then you don't really have to provide any text. If it really does tells a story from the picture, then you can just send that in, and it can be qualified as a submission. So by all means, if you have some photographers in your classroom, or if you just know of some good picture that you have permission to use, or you've taken yourself, then please send it in as a submission. Just Physics is a column devoted to issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the physics teacher. And you can imagine that it has, but it's also something that you can submit to if you contact the column editor. Deepak Iyer is the column editor now. Shannon Wilkowski stepped down at the end of that last year. So Okay. So it's 1:25, and I still have a few more slides I want to share, but I thought we would try to do one more breakout thing where we try to establish an outline for one of your manuscript ideas, including maybe an engaging intro sentence or two, bullet points giving section headings, specific audience that you have in mind, and the key figures you might want to include in your article. So maybe just a couple of the descriptions of the figures that would be useful for your article, because Physics Teacher is a visual journal. It really needs those figures, I think, to enhance the storyline. So, Christine, are we able to go to
Yes.
the breakout groups one more time?
Yep. I'm going to open them up now. There should be 3 people in each room.
And just see if you can put together an outline.
Yeah. So give everyone 10 minutes or so.
All right. Thanks.
Perfect.
Okay, so we're back. So I hope that you got some progress made on your sort of manuscript outline. In some ways, thinking about which figures that you want to include in your manuscript can really move you forward on how to make it really speak to the audience. But I really got a lot out of talking with some of you about what your manuscript ideas were. So I guess now I want to turn to what happens after the fact. What happens after you've written your manuscript? What is the next steps? Or what happens after other people get their hands on it? So let's start. When you think that your idea for a submission is ripe, get ready to write. Go to the guidelines first. The TPT guidelines have this little cat picture on them. And they give you some information about what things you should be looking at as you write. So there's the web link for that. You write a first draft, and then I say, don't show anybody your first draft. Just redo it and write a second draft. Then ask a knowledgeable friend to critique it and write a third draft incorporating their comments. And at that point, I think then it's ready to be considered to be submitted. You submit your manuscript to Peer Express. We call it PXP. It's a software system that automates a lot of the email communications, because as you may know, your manuscript, once it gets in the system, will be sent out electronically to at least 3 reviewers, typically more, because usually not all 3 of them are available to review. And so we have to find 3 that are willing to review. Sometimes we take 2 if they're consistent in their reviews. But before that, TPT managing editor is named Ben Lefstein, and Ben is a great guy who really does fantastic work. He examines your submission to make sure that it has the right format, and if the authors' names are concealed and redacted for the referee's review. So the TPT does anonymous review, so neither the referees nor the authors know whose name is attached to this paper, or who reviewed the paper. Sometimes the authors don't pay attention to the fact that their name should be redacted, and they reveal themselves. But so then we have to black out their name or just have them resubmit it, because we don't really want the reviewers to know who the authors are. Of course, it's much easier to make sure that the authors don't know who the reviewers are. But we sort of believe in this idea that anonymous reviewing is sort of more equitable than if everybody had their name on things. As that's well established, there's all kinds of prejudices that come in when you know the name of the author, that we want to try to avoid. But assuming that everything's okay, then your manuscript will go to another editor, named me, or one of the column editors if it's a column submission, and they will typically review it if they're a column submission editor, or it will be, if it's sent to me, then it will go out as a regular review article to 2 or 3 referees. The editor typically assigns referees, choosing 2 or 3 individuals who published articles on a similar topic, or who are acknowledged experts in that topic. And there's a lot of people to choose from, but there's a lot of people who don't have time to review, so it's tricky. The referees read the paper and critique it, writing a review based on criteria provided and making a summary recommendation. And the summary recommendation is just a brief phrase like revise and resubmit, conditionally accept, or definitely reject. We are advocates at TPT of something I call respectful refereeing. And if you haven't ever refereed a paper for a physics journal like Physics Teacher, then I would love to introduce you to that experience. Because it sounds like to me, everybody here has got enough expertise that they could provide some really good insights to other people's papers, if you're willing to do it. It is a volunteer sort of commitment. And typically I would say papers I review typically take me a few hours for each one. Shorter papers like TPT papers, or maybe just a couple hours or even less. Longer papers like AJP papers take 4 or 5 hours sometimes. But sometimes I have that time to give, especially in the summer, and I tend to try to do that, review articles that are in my area of expertise. But respectful refereeing is sort of moving away from the gatekeeper role that has sometimes been adopted by reviewers, where they feel like that they have to be snarky and use sort of sarcasm at every juncture, especially if the paper is not perfect. And I just don't believe that's a very healthy way for the community to treat each other. So we've sort of outlined these respectful refereeing guidelines, and can be highlighted as revoicing the ideas that are in the paper if you're writing a review, then highlighting the strengths, and identify the implications, even if the paper is not able to fully actualize those implications. You should indicate areas for improvement, and avoid unsupported value judgments and sarcasm, and make sure that your recommendation fits in the manuscripts and standards for the journal. Anyway, so we have a document there about respectful reviewing that is useful, I think, and helpful as we review each other's work. After the quality reviews are written, and we have enough of them, and they are reasonably consistent, or at least there's some direction clear to the editor, then they go back to the editor, and the editors decide the next step. The decisions are revise and resubmit typically, or conditionally accept, or accept without further revision, or just reject. Then goes to the author with the review comments and further directions from the editors. If it's reject, then we don't consider the paper any further. But the other 3 categories require further consideration. Usually that means that they'll be reviewed again by another sometimes a new set of referees, but usually it's the same set of referees to see if the changes that were insisted upon or that recommended were made. And again, all of them in line with this idea that the principal criterion at Physics Teacher is whether it be interesting to entry-level teachers. If you get to the acceptance stage, after repeated revise and resubmits or conditionally accept, and you finally get to accept, then that's where we're celebrating. You have a party, and then you, Ben Lefstein at TPT will then prepare the manuscript to be laid out. The galley proof of the paper is then produced by publication specialist Jane Chambers. And if you've ever gone to an AAPT meeting, you've probably met Ben and Jane, because they both are often at the booth there that TPT hosts at AAPT meetings. After Jane makes the galley proof, then she sends it back to the authors and to the editors, and everybody reviews it once or more times to try to make sure there's no typographical errors or anything else left. And then it gets published at that point. So, are there any questions for me in these last few minutes that we have here?
Yeah, so I actually sent a question, in chat box, but yeah, here I can ask. So I'm just wondering, what is the expected time frame for acceptance or rejection decision when we submit a paper?
So from submission to publication is about a
Yeah.
year these days.
Right.
Submission to acceptance might be 4 to 6 months,
Okay.
I would say. It depends critically on how fast I can get referees to agree to write them, and then do they write substantial enough reviews or quality enough reviews that a decision can be made. This is longer than some journals, I will say, 4 to 6 months. But it's shorter than some journals, and it is longer than it was 2 or 3 years ago, just because of the sudden surge of papers that we've had in this recent year. So,
Right. Okay. Thank
does
you.
that answer your question, Bilas?
Yeah. That's it.
Thanks.
Gary, there was another question in the chat. If pictures of students are within the submission, do they require permission either from the student or from the parent, depending on the age?
Yes, generally speaking, if you have people in the photo that aren't you, or then you should have permission to use that picture. And that sometimes we don't ask that question until it's almost in the final stages, and then sometimes that figure has to be taken out or blotted over, or blocked out, the identification of it. So it's something to take care of early on if you can at all. I have a little bit more I could provide about my own experiences submitting articles. It's 3 or 4 slides, if you're interested, or we could just answer a few more questions. Are there other pressing questions that we want to address?
I have a question, Gary.
All right, great.
If you had submitted an article and it got rejected, is it possible to rewrite and resubmit, or should we just move on?
I would say it's a little bit tricky question. What I tend to say, if I get asked this, is if you are willing to write a new article, it may cover some of the same topics. But it should have a new title. It should have no common prose. Even if it covers the same territory, then I think that's certainly a thing to do, to resubmit it as a new article. But just changing the title and submitting the same text will usually get the ire of both the referees and the editors, and will not have a very good shot at it being resubmitted. Usually there are very specific reasons why it gets rejected, and you'd have to accommodate those reasonings too. The most common reason why an article is rejected from TPT is because it's not really for introductory physics teachers. It's either it might be a very interesting story and have merits otherwise, but if it doesn't really address introductory physics teachers, then it's hard to justify it being moved forward in physics teacher. But whatever the reasons were for the rejection, you want to address them and produce a new manuscript that is, independent from the one that got rejected. And then I would say, yes, that's worth trying. Jacob.
Yeah. I was wondering if there's any common mistakes to avoid when writing the paper to be published.
The most common mistake, I would say, is not referencing relevant previous work, or not even acknowledging relevant previous work. And alongside that is citing 10 references that are sort of vaguely related to what you're doing, but at no point saying how these papers are related to what you're doing. In other words, just vaguely referencing 10 papers that have something, the same word in the title, usually doesn't fly with most reviewers. They want to know exactly why you're citing this previous work. Is it because you varied this parameter, and you found a new result from this previous work, or is it analogous to this, but you've changed these 5 things? So you really need to sort of know the field well enough to know how your work relates to the previous work and why it's new enough and interesting enough to be written about again. So that's the most common thing I would say. You want to avoid, routine grammar errors and things like that, because some reviewers just cannot get past it.
Mhm.
And so you don't want to, I can't always tell ahead of time what kind of reviewer that people are going to be. And if grammar, drives them up a wall, they're going to find other things they don't like.
Yeah.
So you want to have a grammar person kind of fix all the problems ahead of time that are most obvious, for sure.
Mhm.
I don't know. Does that help, Jacob?
Oh yeah, definitely. Thank you.
So,
Tell your story. Go ahead.
well, we have about 5 minutes left. I want to make sure there's time for evaluation.
Oh,
We have a
sorry.
short evaluation. So maybe if you want to quickly share your story, and then we'll move on to the evaluations.
So the first manuscript I submitted to TPT was about an Atwood machine paper. The paper was by somebody else. They had a sand funnel that was leaking sand, and they had put it on an Atwood machine. And of course, it has a variable mass Atwood machine. So it was kind of a new take on an Atwood machine. And it was very cool how they did the experiment, and then they did some theoretical work to model the experiment, and they got good results. But I had a student who read that paper and thought, oh, we could figure out a theoretical model that's different than this one, that's more calculus based. And so we were able to do that successfully, and we submitted our article to the physics teacher, and it got accepted. And this student was a freshman. He was his first year when he wrote this, or when he had this aspiration. It didn't get published until his junior year, but it took me 2 years to kind of get to that place. And what place was it? It was an leave of absence. So I'll just say that my successes in publications generally happen whenever I take enough of a break between jobs to be able to write things, because I've never had a job where they really, rewarded you for writing. So I had to just wait in between times, or at least put them in the summer at the very least. So I suspect that many of you might be in that situation too, where it's really for your own benefit in some real sense that you're writing. And I'll just stop with that story, because you need that time to write for a publication. And thank you everyone for your attention. And I'll let Chris then do the assessment she needs to do.
Yes, so it's a very brief evaluation of the workshop, and we'll share feedback anonymously. Well, it is an anonymous evaluation. So we'll share it back with Gary. And thank you, Gary, for taking time out of your Saturday, and all of you for coming on this Saturday to our workshop. And
you're welcome.
See if I can.
I'll sign off now.
No, you need to stay.
Oh, I need to stay. Okay, sorry. I thought you needed me to sign off. Okay.
No, you don't need to stay, but if folks had questions they wanted to stay and ask.
I'm glad to stay. I'm glad to stay.
Great. And I will stop the recording now.